close it is to Tehran. Here, let's go to this map here. And we're also going to pull a map up and put it on our wall behind us. But we're just going to have a look. Mojtaba Khamenei, likely Iran's new supreme leader. That's another big announcement coming out, and that's going to be formalized very soon. Mojtaba Khamenei, likely Iran's supreme leader. Let's bring in Akanksha once again and ask her a little bit about Mojtaba Khamenei.
Right.
Yes.
So, as we were discussing earlier, these are a host of names that were being discussed, and even say the probable successors. Mojtaba Khamenei also happens to be part of the overall orthodoxy. As I said, it's not like you will see a regime change which will be heavily Western in its approach, as we had seen during the time of the monarch, who was very much in favor of the US. US, of course, has ensured that whatever regime changes happen are in the good books of the US, as we've seen in the case of Ahmad al-Sharia, who is the new Syrian president. Remember, he was somebody who was a terrorist, but the US deemed him fit. He's now the president of Syria. Look at the case in Venezuela. You have Delcy Rodriguez. Again, she's trying to keep the US administration happy. So the US also trying to find a middle ground over here, because they know the kind of power that the Islamic clergy also is wielding. So even as far as Mojtaba Khamenei is concerned, this is going to be somebody who will be able to sort of do that balancing act between the IRGC, between the Islamic Council in Iran, and perhaps also be able to ensure the return of democracy. Maybe if the US wants it, the youth would want that. As far as the cost of living crisis is concerned, that is addressed, but it is the Transition Council that is going to now play a very important role.
Where is it going to be based, viewers? Of course, that remains to be seen, but there are really two power centers. There is the one where obviously administrative power lies, which is Tehran, and then there is Qom, which is the spiritual center. And this is where those protests that we just showed you are taking place. This is where the pro-regime protesters are out in those mosques chanting deaths to America, deaths to Satan, deaths to Zion, deaths to Israel. So that's where that is happening. And that's, if you were to draw a line between Qom and Tehran, they're roughly on the same latitude, just that Qom is more west than Tehran, but it's in that northwest part where, of course, some of the attacks have been concentrated over the last few days. And you can see some of these attacks on Urmia and Kermanshah. Isfahan here is where one of the prime nuclear research facilities, this is right in the center really of Iran, is located. So this is really the geography, if you can see. This is Qom here, this is Tehran, and this is Isfahan. This triangle really at one level is where things are or manifest themselves in a way that keeps this regime in power. This is the grid. This is the grid. And let me just go straight across to George Birnbaum, who joins us. Good morning from India, Mr. Birnbaum. Thank you for joining us here. We're talking of now potential regime change. When does America and Israel decide this operation is over, that the objectives have been met? There's been a decapitation strike. It's been confirmed now by Iran. What do you think is that point?
So there are two objectives that one of your guests previously mentioned. There are military targets, missile launchers, warehouses of drones, those kinds of things. And then there are political targets. And regime change is not as simple as just cutting off the head of the snake. As your colleague said regarding Venezuela, we got rid of Maduro and Delcy Rodriguez is there, and you still have the head of the army. And in a country like Iran, you have the Republican Guard, you have the internal security forces, you have the military, the police forces, many of which at the higher levels of leadership have been a big part of the crackdown on the civilian population. So regime change is not just about removing the Ayatollah. It's also about removing enough of that next tier of leadership in such a way that when the people do try to take back the country, they have the ability to do so without the threat of violence and the crackdown. So it's a process, and that process is not as easy as dropping a bomb on a bunker of a leader. That requires a little more, let's call it human boots on the ground, if you will, and other means by which to decapitate that level of leadership such that you can have regime change. That's not a quick process. That takes time. Is that weeks? Is that months? Time will tell. But I am sure we'll see an effort over the coming days and weeks to remove that next level of leadership in Iran in order to allow for the regime change to take place.
George Birnbaum is former chief of staff of Prime Minister Netanyahu. And I do want to ask you, we've already seen some quick announcements from the Iranian regime. A new commander who was the deputy commander so far to be the new commander of the IRGC. A leadership council announced with the President Pezeshkian part of it. Till last evening, there were doubts about his safety and well-being as well. We don't really know. But the Iranian regime has announced he's part of this council. So they're suggesting he's well and alive and can take this forward. And now Mojtaba Khamenei to be taking over as the new supreme leader. He's the second eldest son of Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran. I want your thoughts on this because they're already announcing a lot of their leadership, the transitional leadership.
Yeah, well, your viewers might recall after October 7th happened, every time a leader of Hamas was removed and they announced a new leader within a day or two or three, that leader was also eliminated. I'm not suggesting necessarily there's going to be a series of Ayatollahs, of spiritual leaders day after day, but I am suggesting that, as I think your colleague mentioned, depending on the tone and depending on the approach that the new spiritual leader takes towards the United States and Israel, that we'll see whether or not they become targets or they become partners in moving Iran forward towards a more democratic process.
So you're suggesting that the US and Israel will kind of adopt a wait-and-watch approach to see where the leadership, what tone and tenor they're adopting. But George, the US has already announced that this entire operation would be at least a week-long operation. So I want to understand this timeline that they have set already. What all is still in store, according to you?
Their primary, secondary, tertiary military targets, as I mentioned, they go a little deeper than just actual missile launchers or factories. I think that goes to command and control centers around the country. As your host had shown, you know, there is home. There are other cities in which we have to focus attention where the Iranians have hid weapons, hidden capabilities. So the primary targets were really what you take out in the first 24, 48 hours. And then you get to your secondary and tertiary list of targets. Once you have air superiority, which has been established in the past 24 hours, the Americans, the Israelis can fly over the skies freely without the threat of surface-to-air missiles, without the threat of any other air-to-air combat. So now you can really focus on those harder-to-get targets and use your military might in ways that you couldn't in the first 24 to 48 hours.
So let's just very quickly open this up because there's a lot of news coming in. And Mr. Birnbaum, I have to ask you, and we also joined this morning by Bishambar Dayal. Thank you, sir, for making time on a Sunday morning. Look at what's happened. The world is changing very quickly as far as the Gulf is concerned. New equations coming into play. But George Birnbaum, look, I agree that the Ayatollah and those other horrific mass murderers needed to go. There's no doubt that they're a scourge on humanity, that they had committed untold crimes against their own people. Having said that, do you believe we've crossed a Rubicon now where we have set a precedent for countries to step in and carry out blatant regime change in this manner? There were covert operations all through the Cold War. They have lasted over the last 2 decades, but they were more or less covert, unless, of course, there was a clear and absolute threat emerging from a regime to a particular country, and that was really called war. Now, here we have a preemptive strike. This is clearly not a preemptive strike. If this was a preemptive strike, this would not have led to a decapitation. So under the guise of a preemptive strike, now we have full-blown war. We can't control the escalation ladder because we don't know this unpredictable regime there with its back to the wall, what it's going to resort to. It's targeting other Islamic countries in the Gulf. This war is spreading. Have we unleashed something that we can't control? And where does this end? That's the question I was asking.
No, it's a fair question. However, Iran, I think, is unique in the sense that this is a country that clearly stated it wanted to use every and all of its capabilities to rain terror of not just on Israel, but around the world. They have been at the nexus of funding terror around the world, along with Venezuela, through gold and drug money. And they were developing nuclear capability to put on ballistic missiles. I mean, I don't know that any of your viewers, if they had the chance to go back in time and ensure that Pakistan would not be able to develop 170